So I got into mad beef with another YouTuber the other day. Being that I'm loving One Punch Man to its entirety, I decided, yes, I will cave in and read the manga. So I did over the last 24 hours, read it twice because I'm a mad lad and it's really freaking good. So anyway, I mentioned to my alleged friend, Anime Uproar, I freaking love Garou. He's potentially my favorite character in One Punch Man. The only character that comes close to him is Saitama. And honestly, I don't know who I prefer. And then Anime Uproar replied to me, I like a ton of the characters in One Punch Man, but Garou is a trash character because he has no motive. So, being that I am an adult, my course of action was simple. I had several options. A, debate him for hours. B, make a video on Garou. Or C, tackle the topic of motive in villains altogether. Since, to be honest, I've heard this said an insurmountable amount of times, that it's a motive that makes a villain great. Now, being that I am a potentially psychopathic nutcase that relates to potentially psychopathic nutcase characters, I vehemently disagree with this point. I don't think motive is the end-all to an anime villain, or any villain for that matter. I feel like motive is a great way to write a villain, but it's not the only way to write a great villain. So I decided I would research this point and talk about the genius of motiveless villains. To lay things out, as far as villains with motivations, I feel like they basically fall into two categories. Category A, personal motive. They want to take over the world, be the politically strongest like you see in One Piece, become the most powerful like you see in Bleach, as well as many other personal goals. This is a motive per se, but not precisely something that I would relate to. I don't relate to Voldemort from Harry Potter, and therefore I don't consider him to be a brilliantly written villain. A terrifying one, yes, but not a brilliantly written one. The other style of villains with motive that I generally prefer would be a motive that follows some form of ideology. Someone like Stain from My Hero Academia that's killing heroes because he feels like that's the best way to better society. Pain from Naruto because he wants to inject fear into the world by controlling this tailed beast weapon that can annihilate any country at a moment's notice. If everyone fears him, then no one fights anyone and the world is at peace. Or even someone like Light Yagami from Death Note, a guy who has a death note that whoever he writes in the book dies, so he starts killing off all forms of villains and criminals and all-round bad people. Yes, he gets a lot of good people, especially the ones that are trying to chase him, and the ones that are, unfortunately, misjudged and, let's say, imprisoned for the wrong reasons. Those people all die. He kills hundreds of thousands of people. However, it's said in Part 2 of Death Note that over 70% of crime in the world has stopped because they're afraid of this seeming deity like Kira that will strike them down. Stain, Pain, and Light Yagami are three of my favorite anime villains. However, they do follow a motive, and that motive isn't personal growth as much as it is an ideology. Yes, this nihilistic path that Light Yagami was taking, where he was deciding who lives and dies, developed his hubris to an insane degree, where maybe he wasn't killing for his ideology anymore, but that's not the point. There is a solid ideology backing up the actions of all three of these villains. That's why they're three great villains, and that's my favorite way for motive to be written in a villain in general. Now, I say this as a quasi-introduction to what this video is really about because I've seen this everywhere. I've heard literary teachers talk about this, that, oh, the first thing you must do in writing a villain is writing a good motive. And I'm about to list you 4 villains from 4 different anime that are 4 of my favorite villains in anime, and none of them have a distinct motive. There's Garou from One Punch Man, who's quickly rising the ranks to become my favorite villain ever. There's Chrollo Lucifer from Hunter x Hunter, Yoshikage Kira from JoJo's Bizarre Adventure Part 4, and Gilgamesh, the king of heroes from Fate Zero. Now, the reason why I've selected these 4 specific anime villains is simple. Firstly, I deeply love all 4 of these characters. They're all fantastic in their own right. Secondly, none of them have a defined motive. Yeah, what's driving Garou, or Chrollo, or Kira, or Gilgamesh, which is the correct way to pronounce Gilgamesh, and if you don't, it's cultural appropriation. But, alas, despite the fact that these are 4 widely loved anime villains, none of them have defined motivations. What? Could it actually be that literary teachers as well as anime upper are wrong, and a villain doesn't need a laid-out motivation to be a great villain? Fascinating. Seriously though, no shade at anyone. I understand the logic of motivation that matters, but I just had personal different experiences with this stuff, and I like thinking out of the box. So if you disagree with this, feel free to let me know in the comments. Honestly, I am down to hear. However, making fun at literary teachers in Animac is so much fun. Sorry, literary teachers in Animac. I love both of you, mostly Animac. And I really thank you for prompting me to make this video, because it's not something I would have made without these prompts. Link to Anime Uproar's channel is in the description. He makes great shiz, but he thinks villains needs motives. Alas, no one is perfect. There is one underlying feature, though, that is present in all 4 of these characters that I've listed, and in every good anime villain that does not contain a straight-out motive. And that is a fascinating psychology. And take that with a grain of salt, as I am about to explain. Garou, the villain in One Punch Man that's killing heroes, plays with our minds from the moment he's introduced on screen. As I've mentioned in my introduction to Garou video, fam, he is treated like a protagonist. We're watching through his eyes, his quest to become stronger. We're watching him get up from the hurdles he's facing and standing up no matter how many times he's thrown down. Throughout the manga, which I will not be spoiling here because that's just cruel, everybody dies. I'm kidding. Yeah. But anyway, it continues to point Garou out as a protagonist. All the chapters that he's on screen, I find myself rooting for the bastard, even though he's fighting heroes for the sake of hunting heroes and getting stronger. He calls himself a monster, but there's something massive at play here that distinguishes him from monsters. At this point in the manga, we know a lot of monsters, and we know Garou fairly well. Garou is one of the most human characters in One Punch Man, despite the fact that he's rapidly becoming a monster, as interesting as that may sound. He's mentioned in the manga. It doesn't say this in the anime. I don't know why. It's a little annoying, but when he was a kid and he was rooting for the villains, like the anime pointed out, he was watching anime or whatever, and Justice Man would save the day, and he'd feel bad for the villains that were killed. And when he'd play around with his friends in the playground, they would play heroes and monsters. And of course, the heroes would defeat the monsters in their imaginary D&D-esque game that they would play. Now, Garou then said, I feel bad for the monsters though, because the sea monster that attacked the humans attacked because the humans were polluting his sea and killing off his fellow sea monster people. It's so sad that Justice Man killed him, just like everyone else. The monsters don't have a chance. And of course the kids laughed at him because this guy was threatening humanity and all that, and obviously the hero's duty is to save humanity and to save the day. That doesn't revoke the validity though in the words of Garou or in the ideology of this made-up monster. However though, yes, this monster was written to have a good motivation, and it's that monster's very motivation that motivates Garou. Not that Garou is per se fighting for any specific motive or reasoning. It's not like he's aiming for some end goal aside from becoming more powerful. But aside from the perspectival tricks that the series is playing in the way it treats Garou like a protagonist, the way I root for Garou, and the struggle that it shows when he gets up after losing a fight. But Garou really likes this kid that was showing him his hero book. He ended up saving that kid. That kid has some really messed up stuff happen to him, and Garou saves him. Not because Garou's a hero, but because that's how Garou feels he should be acting at that given moment. That sea monster in that show that Garou was defending had a valid ideology. However, being that it was treated as the monster, its ideology was snuffed away with its life force when Justice Man killed him. Just because something is treated as a villain or treated as a monster, whether in One Punch Man or in real life, that doesn't mean it's 100% invalid. Yes, the monster had to be dealt with. It was threatening humanity, but at the same time, humanity was poisoning that monster and its family with the pollution or whatever the plot point of that show that Garou was watching was. One of Garou's greatest attributes is his insane amounts of compassion, and despite the fact that he's fighting tons of heroes, beating them to pulps, yet not killing a single one of them, Garou is aiming to be a monster fighting heroes for no basic ideology aside from getting stronger, and yet he still twists our hand, forcing us to acknowledge him as one of the most compassionate characters in the One Punch Man series. That's what makes him so fascinating. It's the blatant paradox in his every action. He's dreaming to be a monster, but as the monsters themselves have mentioned, his feet are rooted deeply into humanity. This is not my character analysis on Garou, because I have a lot to say that I intend to say on a different date, so feel free to subscribe if you'd like to hear me talk about Garou in depth. As a character, aside from just how well he serves the purpose of a villain, even though he doesn't have a directed motive, Garou changed how I looked at the series, how I looked at him, and how I looked at myself. No one is freaking perfect in this world. There's no ideal perfect hero, aside from like Moomin Rider, that's taking down the ultimate villain. The world is not black and white like hero versus villains in the TV shows seem to say it is. Garou is the embodiment of morally gray, hunting heroes yet being compassionate simultaneously, and that's what makes him so interesting. He's the most real character in One Punch Man, despite the fact that every single time they seem to kill him, he just gets up stronger. Garou motivates the F out of me. Imagine how terrifying that is, because he is a ruthless-seeming villain. Now, touching on character psychology, and why Garou is so interesting because of how I can see his non-ideological philosophy in this everyday life, and how people are treated in this very world. But on a more personal level, Chrollo Lucifer from Hunter x Hunter does a much better job at tackling a major issue, and that would be the inability to understand himself. So I did a full video on the psychology of Chrollo, and it made him one of my favorite anime characters, that's for sure. On first watching of Hunter x Hunter, out of the three major antagonists being Hisoka, Meruem, and Chrollo, he was my least favorite by quite a bit. But after rewatching it and rewording it in the form of that character analysis I've previously mentioned, that will be linked at the end of the video or whatever, he easily jumped the rankings as one of my favorite anime villains. Chrollo does not have motive, and that's exactly what makes him an interesting villain. He's someone who wanders around looking for purpose in himself, and he can't find it. He's someone who doesn't understand exactly how tragic of a position he's in, with no one he can truly feel love to and no one that truly loves him. The Phantom Troop acts like a family where they care for each other and take revenge for one another, but at the same time, for Chrollo, it's more going through the motions than actually feeling emotions. The thing Chrollo fights most in the entirety of Hunter x Hunter is himself. He cannot, for the life of him, understand his own identity, who he is, or what purpose he possesses. And so he wanders. So he's formed the Phantom Troop, this incredibly talented group of people that basically do whatever the hell they want. And the reason for this is Meteor City, his home, was destroyed, and at this point he feels nothing. He's on a journey to feel something, and he doesn't even know where to begin. This tragic state of Chrollo's being is an over-personification of something a lot of people feel. Someone like me, who has been in depressed states in the past, can relate to this on a very deep level. I understand the feeling of not understanding myself, and Chrollo's narrative hurts me so much because he doesn't even know he doesn't understand himself. Chrollo is one of my favorite villains because he has no motive. It's because he has no motive that he cuts me so deep when he does anything in Hunter x Hunter. When his powers are sealed, these insanely intricate Nen powers that he's been working at for years, that he's been amassing and becoming stronger and stronger, when Kurapika sealed them, he didn't even feel sad. He didn't shed a tear. His expression didn't break. For him, it's just the next step forward, and he doesn't know where he's heading. Maybe this will help him find himself. Depression is a seemingly endless chasm, and Chrollo is falling through it. That's why I relate to him to such a deep level, and that's why it's so much more powerful that he has no motive. Now, on an opposite tangent from depression, we have something else that a lot of people struggle through. In fact, I think most people struggle through it for at least one point or another, and some people don't have it quite so much, and that would be Gilgamesh's pride. Gilgamesh in Fate Zero is a servant summoned to take place in this Holy Grail war. Now, he is someone who sees everything as beneath him, because he is the king of kings, the one where everything in the universe belongs to him, where everyone else is just his plaything. The reason why Fate Zero is one of my favorite anime is because every single character, be it a master or a servant, they each individually have a fascinating ideology for what pushes them forward, and they're an embodiment of different ideals. Kiritsugu is utilitarianistic, and his servant Saber is completely noble, which are intuitively two entirely opposite ideals despite the fact that they are working together. Everyone is gunning for the Grail for their own motive except for Gilgamesh. Gilgamesh seemingly wants the Grail, or at least will take place in the battle, because the Grail is already his. All the wonders of the world belong to him. And so therefore he'll play around in this little game, cause why the F not? Fate Zero summons many different servants from many different timelines, and many of them exhibit pride. Saber has a pride in herself, Ryder has a pride in himself, but Gilgamesh's is above and beyond anything that we see here. His pride overtakes even his ambitions, and it turns him into the perfect jester character. He's a character that's manipulating things behind the scenes for the sake of manipulating them. Normally, being bad for the sake of being bad is not the type of character anyone wants in any form of media. It's a character that's not interesting psychologically and not interesting motive-wise or ideologically. Gilgamesh isn't evil for the sake of evil. He isn't per se even evil. He's enigmatic, he's prideful, he's dangerous, and he plays by his own rules. He'll poke and prod Kirei to even kill his own master and take over because that interests him. I decided to talk about Gilgamesh here as opposed to a character like Hisoka from Hunter x Hunter or Izaya from Durarara, because I feel like Gilgamesh's contrast to every other character in the series gives a much better perspective on what I'm trying to get at. He's manipulative, he's smug, and the bastard wears a glowing gold armor, for God's sake. You're not sneaking up on anyone like that, Gilgy. But even though he's an insufferable, arrogant twat to deal with at first, as the series goes on and he just exudes more and more prideful confidence in his seemingly insurmountable abilities, we find ourselves respecting him. I find myself respecting this glowing gold, glorious a-hole. And the scariest thing is, other characters are starting to respect him as well. In the Banquet of Kings, to an extent, Saber does revere him and Ryder does look up to Gilgamesh, with Gilgamesh not looking back at Ryder. He respects Ryder for who he is, but he doesn't see him as an equal. In the end of the day, after his fight with Ryder, he walks up to Waver Velvet and says to him, "If you still see Ryder as your king, hold his ideals within your heart." Gilgamesh is not evil. He's by no means compassionate, but he is someone that deserves respect. And if you can respect a ruthless, pompous, prideful, overpowered, conniving, scheming, backstabbing villain, then that makes him freaking fascinating. So despite the fact that Garou, Chrollo, and Gilgamesh are all villains without motives per se, they all tackle an extremely different psychological point that makes them so fascinating. Gilgamesh, a villain that I can look up to, despite all of his horrible traits. Chrollo, a villain that I so deeply relate to, despite the horrible acts he's committing. And Garou, a character that I root for understanding the moral gray of the world, despite the fact that he's a horrible paradox of a very human being. These are three different ways to take this route, but a fourth is Yoshikage Kira from JoJo's, as I've mentioned before. Kira, my favorite villain in JoJo so far, hands down. I haven't read part 7, I'm sorry, I will, don't worry, never fear. However, you can't deny that Kira is a genius villain. I made a video on him as well, so we won't really be going too in depth here. And I understand that I'm basically fueling the meme fire at this point with those literally nobody memes. I literally hate those memes. Kira chops the hand off a random woman and starts sucking on the amputated fingers. Literally nobody. Nux Taku. I relate to that. Yes, I know. It's hilarious. Ha 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 ha. It's kind of sad, not gonna lie. However, let's not deny that Kira's a great villain regardless. But what makes him a great villain? Well, it's not his motive. The guy's motive is literally chasing his boner. The guy has weird fetishes and he's a mass murderer. But he's very meticulous. We see things from his perspective for a large part of the series. And what's really scary about Kira is despite the fact that he has no motive, we rationalize with him. We start to see things from his perspective and we understand where he's coming from. This is the most morose villain you could think of. Someone purely driven by his own lustful desires and hurting countless of innocents because of it. Kira is the exact quintessential societal monster that we all see as a monster. But the way Kira's story takes place is that we start seeing things from his perspective, him trying to blend in with a family, him trying to control his urges, not to get caught, him just wanting to live a peaceful, quiet life, and we relate to Kira. Not perhaps to the point that we're gonna go start killing women and cutting off their hands and sucking on, or guys! Look, you can kill guys and cut their hands off and suck on their fingers. That's totally okay too. What am I defending here? Gender equality? This is not a gender equality video, but if you're gonna cut the hand off a woman, cut the hand off a man too. Where was I? Oh, yes. It's true Kira's sexual fetishes are slightly weirder than most. I mean, not all. I've seen some really creepy Sonic pictures floating around Twitter, and honestly, makes Kira look pretty normal. Not normal, I would totally go on a date with this guy normal, but normal, I could sort of relate to hand fetish more than creepy CGI monsters. Not that hand fetishes are good, especially when it involves killing the participant and cutting their hands off. Let's not get into this discussion today, okay? But the fact that you could see through the eyes of a quintessential dark side of society, which is literally what Kira represents, because the town of Morio is the main character of JoJo's Part 4, and he is the deep, dark underbelly of society. He is the monster lurking in the shadows that you don't even know about in your very own town. Maybe he's not as creepy as Kira, maybe he can't blow shiz up, but you get my drift. And despite the fact that he's the most horrid quintessential monster, seeing through his eyes, seeing him be meticulously just trying to live a normal life, the rationalization felt towards Kira is terrifying on a meta level. That's why Kira is one of the most brilliant villains, despite the fact that he has no motive. Not only despite the fact, but he's brilliant because he has no motive. He's brilliant because he's the least relatable villain you could think of, but you relate to him once you see through his eyes, no matter how twisted his worldview is. So, do I think a villain needs a motive? Well, have you been watching this video? Like, did you need me to ask that rhetorical question? No! A villain does not need a motive. However, I feel like a villain without a motive is much harder to write correctly than a villain with one. A villain with a powerful ideology that calls philosophical questions into light is generally my go-to as far as anime villains, or as far as any villains. As far as interesting characters, that's kind of what I'm looking for. But the villains that really pull me into their world, that really fascinate me, are the ones with no motive that I still love. The crazy psychopath villains that I relate to. Maybe I relate to them because I'm a psycho sociopath nutcase that likes memes maybe a little bit too much. But even if that's the case, granted, I relate to Garou, Chrollo, Gilgamesh, and Kira. That is exactly what is so terrifying about a motiveless villain. I do thank you all so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and I'm very curious to hear your take in the comments, because this is a video going against the fabric of society itself. Well, not really, but yes, really. Feel free to subscribe for future anime videos that you never knew you wanted. Future One Punch Man videos, JoJo, Fate Zero, Hunter x Hunter. I love all of those shizzles, so I may be making videos on all of those shizzles. Feel free to check out my other satire or analysis content. That would be very cool. Link in the description to my Twitter. Feel free to follow me there for the power of memes, as well as updates and other cool stuff. Link in the description as well to my Patreon. All patrons are invited to the Discord server where we hang out and make fun of me for relating to every single sociopathic anime character ever. Wonder what that says about me. I would like to especially thank David Unknown, Negus Nogus, Burning Bush, Rise Warren, Sage of Snake, Wilson Fletcher, Team Sparky65, The Unknown Taku, Lazy Ronan, Girthy Worm, Jim, Allison Stricker, The Wolf of Gar, JD Fincher, Q-Tippy, Laser, The Ethan, Ravy, Landic, Nick Sands, King Tank Games, Kevin McCline, Jordan, White Noise 32, Nasty Frank's Barbecue, Stanley Ramsrude, Best is Daddy Cross, Mitchell Garnett, Miriam Ramirez, Chezzy, Ham is the Great, Praise Lord the Gilgamesh, you know it, Billy Thompson, Serial Flex Offender, Sheenon Self Says, JJ Slade Rams, The Night Bright, Sergeant Malarkey, LJ, Kaiser Wanar, Dan Soko, Divine Reigns, Teakui, Exiled, Skylar Lake, Samuel Guzman, Burning Halo, Karma, and TM Philly. Thanks to the Lord Tweeger Rank, Anthony Booth, Chubbs is the Man, Noctris 13, Baby Ray, Matthew Yang, MD, Adria Pica, Soza Nerdified, Everest Esposito, and Kyle the Warrior. Thanks to the God Usopp Rank, Dark Element, Eduardo Flores, Boozerker, Muafak, Necro, Sunny Parks, Maurice Luis Dreyfus, and Gintama for life. And thank you to the man, the myth, the legend, Steve. Thank you all so much for watching this video. I hope you did enjoy it, and perhaps you could see villains without motives in a different light, because there sometimes really are. awesome, sometimes even better. Link to Anime Uproar's channel is in the description. He did inspire me to make this video, even though it was sort of by accident. He really is a great dude and makes great videos, so feel free to check him out and send him some cringe in the comments. Stop relating to anime sociopaths, because that's weird. But then again, remember to stay weird, fam.